My name is Emily Brooks. I'm 41 years old, and for 22 years, I proudly served in the United States Navy. During that time, I learned that real honor isn't measured by medals or ceremonies. It's measured by the people who come home because you refuse to leave them behind. The Navy Cross I wear isn't a trophy. It's a reminder of a mission that changed my life forever and of friends who never got the chance to grow old. After retiring, I wanted a quiet life. My husband, Daniel, and I dreamed about traveling, fishing on weekends, and finally enjoying the peaceful mornings we'd sacrificed for years. But life had other plans. Daniel passed away unexpectedly 3 years after my retirement, leaving behind a silence that no amount of time could completely fill. For months, his family stood beside me, especially his younger sister, Melissa. At least, that's what I believed. Then everything slowly changed. Friendly phone calls became arguments about Daniel's belongings. Casual conversations turned into accusations. She suddenly questioned every decision I'd made after his death, insisting that certain keepsakes, military memorabilia, and family heirlooms belonged to her instead of me. I tried to keep the peace. I invited her over to sort through old photographs. I offered sentimental items that meant more to her than they did to me. I honestly believed compassion would calm the situation. Instead, every compromise seemed to convince her she deserved even more. Then, one quiet Tuesday morning, a process server knocked on my front door. Melissa had officially filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I had wrongfully kept valuable family property, including military items she insisted never legally belonged in my possession. As I walked into that courthouse, I still believed one thing. The truth would be enough. The courthouse looked exactly the way I remembered military briefing rooms: cold, quiet, and filled with people who had already formed opinions before anyone spoke. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a simple navy blue suit. The only thing that stood out was the Navy Cross pinned neatly above my heart. I wasn't wearing it to impress anyone. That medal had accompanied me on every Memorial Day and every veteran's ceremony since I retired. To me, leaving it behind would have felt like leaving part of my past behind. Melissa walked in a few minutes later with her attorney. She never looked at me. Instead, she smiled confidently, as though she'd already rehearsed the ending. When our eyes finally met, there wasn't sadness or hesitation. There was certainty. The judge entered, and everyone rose. From the very first moments, something felt wrong. He barely glanced at the evidence before asking Melissa's attorney to begin. Every claim against me was presented with dramatic confidence. According to them, I had become obsessed with my military recognition. They suggested I wore the Navy Cross into court to gain sympathy instead of justice. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Before my attorney could even respond, the judge looked directly at me. "Mrs. Brooks," he said firmly, "remove the medal. This courtroom isn't the place for symbolic displays." The room became so quiet I could hear someone drop a pen behind me. Without arguing, I carefully unpinned the Navy Cross and placed it inside its small protective case. I refused to give anyone the reaction they expected. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa smirk. Each time my attorney tried explaining the history behind the medal or correcting factual errors, the judge interrupted and moved the hearing forward. It felt as though every decision had already been made before I ever entered that courtroom. Finally, I leaned toward my attorney and whispered, "May we submit one final military document before today's hearing ends?" My attorney stood and held up the sealed envelope I'd brought with me that morning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't oversized or marked confidential. It was an ordinary military envelope that had remained sealed since it arrived at my home several weeks earlier. The judge hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Proceed," he said. My attorney carefully opened it and handed the documents to the court clerk. The first pages contained certified military records confirming every detail of my service history. Next came official award documentation verifying that the Navy Cross had been lawfully presented to me following a classified rescue operation years earlier. Every page carried the proper certifications and signatures. The judge silently flipped through them. Then my attorney requested permission to submit one additional document from the same packet. It wasn't about the medal. It was about the lawsuit. The document included correspondence showing that Melissa had previously requested copies of these exact military records months before filing her claim. She had received them. Her signature acknowledging delivery appeared at the bottom of the receipt. That meant she already knew the Navy Cross legally belonged to me before she ever stepped into court. A murmur spread across the gallery. Melissa's attorney quickly reached for the paperwork, reading each page with growing concern. The confidence he displayed all morning disappeared. He leaned toward Melissa and whispered something I couldn't hear, but her face instantly lost its color. My attorney wasn't finished. He presented another exhibit comparing Melissa's sworn statements with emails and written requests she'd personally signed. Several key claims made in court directly contradicted those earlier documents. The courtroom became perfectly still. Even the judge stopped speaking. For the first time that morning, he wasn't looking at me as though I needed to defend myself. He was looking at the evidence. And for the first time, I realized the truth wasn't just being heard. It was beginning to speak for itself. The judge stared at the documents for several long seconds before quietly setting them down. Then he cleared his throat. "We're taking a 15-minute recess." The courtroom immediately filled with hushed conversations. Attorneys stepped into the hallway. Reporters gathered near the doors, sensing that something had shifted. Melissa remained seated, staring at the table in front of her while her lawyer spoke to her in a voice so low I couldn't make out the words. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't good news. My attorney simply looked at me and smiled. "I told you the facts would eventually matter." When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere was completely different. Melissa's attorney stood first. "Your Honor," he began carefully, "my client wishes to withdraw several of the claims presented before the court." The confidence that had filled the room that morning had completely disappeared. The judge paused before addressing everyone. "The court acknowledges that additional documentation should have been reviewed before any preliminary conclusions were expressed." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing anyone in that courtroom expected to hear. I answered every remaining question calmly, sticking only to the facts. Within weeks, the court dismissed the remaining unsupported claims against me. Separate proceedings were opened to examine whether misleading information had been submitted during the case. At the same time, questions about the judge's handling of the hearing were referred through the proper judicial review process. I didn't celebrate. I simply carried my Navy Cross out of the courthouse, clipped it back where it belonged, and walked into the afternoon sunlight knowing something far more valuable than a lawsuit had been restored. My name. The lawsuit officially ended 2 months later. The court ruled entirely in my favor, confirming that every claim against me lacked the evidence needed to succeed. The military documents had spoken more clearly than any argument ever could. Meanwhile, the judicial review that followed examined the way the hearing had been handled. Months later, I learned the judge had left the bench after that review concluded. His decisions had consequences far beyond my case. As for Melissa, she never called to apologize. The only message I ever received was a short letter from her attorney confirming that the case was over. No excuses. No explanations. Just silence. Oddly enough, I didn't need anything more. A few weeks later, I attended the annual Veterans Memorial Ceremony. Before leaving home, I opened the same protective case I'd carried into that courtroom. I carefully pinned the Navy Cross back where it belonged, not because I wanted anyone to notice it, but because it reminded me of the people who had stood beside me when everything was on the line. Standing among fellow veterans, I realized something important. Respect isn't something another person can give you or take away. It comes from the choices you make when no one is cheering, when the truth is difficult, and when doing the right thing costs more than staying silent. That medal represented service. But the truth it defended became the greatest victory of all.